Hello, friends. The topic for discussion today is lyric. But just as in my last lecture, I told you lyric is a subjective and personal poetry. So it becomes essential for us to know what is subjective poetry and how subjective poetry is different from objective poetry. The distinction that we can make is poetry treats of two kinds of subject matter, that which is supplied by external objects and such as deeds, events and the things we see around us, and that which is supplied by the poet's own thoughts and feelings. The former gives rise to objective poetry, the latter to subjective. In the one case, the poet functions as a detached observer, describing what he had seen or heard. In the other, he brings to bear his own reflections upon what he had seen or heard. The same subject may, of course, be treated either way. If the poet views it from without, confining himself, that is to say, merely to its externals, his treatment is objective. And if he views it from within, giving expression, that is to say, to the thoughts and feelings it arouses in his mind, his treatment is subjective. One might put it more briefly by saying that objective poetry is impersonal and subjective poetry is personal. In the former, the focus of attention is something that is outward, a praiseworthy act, a thrilling occurrence, a beautiful sight, while in the latter, it is the poet himself. Whatever the subject may be, his mind is centered on his own thoughts and feelings. For example, Shakespeare's poem Youth and Age is objective, making a plain statement of fact, whereas Coleridge's Youth and Age is subjective, the expression of deep personal feeling aroused by the subject. Now we come to the origin of the poetry. Objective poetry is older than subjective. The primitive people among whom it developed, like the uncivilized races in some parts of the world today, were more interested in what they saw and heard than in what they thought. They valued the experiences of their eye and ear more than the experiences of their mind. Therefore, their poetry dealt with deeds and events and the things they saw around them, and it called for little mental effort from their hearers. To these poets of the dim past, we owe the communal ballad, which is pure poetry of action, affording little scope for personal reflection. The epic and the drama are two other forms of the objective poetry, in which, as in the ballad, the writer's personality remains in the background. The lyric, the elegy, ode, which belong to later times, represent the subjective variety. But though theoretically subjective and objective poetry belong to two distinct categories, in actual practice it is almost impossible to separate the one from the other. The most impersonal of compositions may bear the stamp of its author. Something of Shakespeare's personality can be gathered from his plays, and much of Milton's from his Paradise Lost. And yet, drama and epic are objective types of poetry. Similarly, the most personal of poems has objective or impersonal passages where the author lays aside his own opinions and sentiments and treats of what is outside himself. So now you are familiar with what is subjective poetry and what is objective poetry and what is the main difference between them. As I told you earlier that lyric is a subjective type of poetry. Now we'll focus in particular on the literary term lyric. Lyric is also a poetic form. First thing that we'll discuss about lyric is its origin. Greek song was divided into two classes, melic or lyric song, and it was a song which was sung by a single voice to the accompaniment of a lyre. And choric song. Choric song was intended for collective singing to the accompaniment of instrumental music, and it was supplemented sometimes by a dance. The first of these divisions is responsible for the lyric in English poetry. True to its Greek origin, it still has the two characteristics implied in the above description. First, it is an expression of a single thought, and secondly, it is a musical composition. Now we come to the music in the lyre. What type of music? In ancient times, the music provided by the minstrel's harp or lyre formed an external accompaniment to a lyric. However unpolished the language of the song, it was made musical by the voice of the singer, keeping tune with the sound of the instrument. The subject matter also was of little importance so long as the singer's voice could give it the right emotional effect. Later it is discovered the rhythmic possibilities of the words themselves unassisted by music. The Elizabethans in particular were past masters of the art of investing words with the highest musical quality. Their lyrics are unrivaled for their world music or verbal melody. The vowels and consonants are so artistically arranged as to compose a music of their own, independent of the aid of a musical instrument, an art which was closely studied and developed in later times by such poets as Shelley, Keats, Tennyson, and Swinburne. Now we come to the subject matter of the lyric. The lyric gives expression to a single emotion or feeling. It appeals more to the heart than to the intellect, or we can say than to the head, or to be more precise, its appeal to the intellect is through the heart. Just as the song we sing are usually not very lengthy, so a lyrical poem is, as a rule, quite brief. When he chooses the lyric form, the poet does not intend to make any long flight. He wishes to convey his impressions swiftly, memorably, and musically. Thus, the term lyric is usually understood to cover the song, the ode, the sonnet, and such poems as in the definition given by Palgrave in the preface to his Golden Treasury, turn on some single thought, feeling, or situation. It goes without saying that the lyric is a subjective poem, for since it expresses the poet's emotion, it cannot help being intensely personal. Now, the structure of the lyric. The lyric can be divided into three distinct parts corresponding to the three moods through which the poet passes when inspired by some emotion. The first part, which generally consists of the first few lines or at the most of the first stanza, states the emotion or the subject which had set the poet's imagination working. Anne Heppel calls it the motive since it sets the ball rolling. The second part, which forms the bulk of the poem, consists of the thoughts suggested by the emotion. By this time, it is well advanced in intensity and therefore the expression reaches its highest pitch of eloquence or passion. The third and final part, which is almost as short as the first and which usually comprises the last stanza, marks the poet's return to his initial mood, the mood of reason. For by this time, the emotion which has stirred his mind and heart has found release in fitting words and images. Unlike the first two parts, the closing part tends to be intellectual in character, including often a judgment, a pointed summary, and ending with a parting smile or sigh. All these three parts may be distinctly noted in the lyrics which have been prescribed for your syllabus. And in our next lecture, we'll discuss the literary term or, and then we'll shift to our textbook for BA Part 1. Thank you.